Today, 1981, we're going to go back to 1981 to a film called Outland. Now, I've been doing a lot of dystopian stuff this week, and this is another dystopian type of 1980s film, which was actually very influential, really influential. It's a Western, except there's no cowboys, and it's not set in the Wild West. It's set on Jupiter's moon, Io. The music was composed by Jerry Goldsmith. Really good music on this. Composed by Jerry Goldsmith. The film was made in England at Pinewood Studios, and it has been described as High Noon in space, and possibly quite accurately. I mean, High Noon, the Western, is a 1952 Western. A town marshal about to retire has to face a gang of killers alone, or he could choose to leave town with his new wife, who is leaving anyway. He's an elderly, he's just about to retire. So that kind of dilemma. Outland is about the same kind of moral dilemma. And although set in space, it isn't really about space or sci-fi much. But it's not just a Western set in space. It is, however, a lone man. It's about a lone man against a system. So it has a lot of resonances. The design, the model making and photography of Outland is very, very high quality, even if the story is a little bit basic and predictable. But one has to bear in mind that this film precedes Blade Runner by a year. But there are a fair few visual cues that might have influenced the set design of the latter. Possibly just in time, or maybe they were all thinking the same way at the same time. There's also a fair few shots of depressurization-related gruesome ends, which might have influenced Total Recall, which is another Philip K. Dick story, as was Blade Runner. At this time, at the time that this went into production, high production sci-fi was one of the most popular themes for films, and so it was correct to do a sort of Western set in space, because everything was set in space in those years. The story, very roughly, is that volcanic activity is discovered on Jupiter's moon Io, not the other three, and consequently mining operations start up there. And you see this resonate in many other films, including Alien, which was a few years before this. The setting is essentially a dangerous and brutal frontier. Writer and director Peter Hyams imagined it as being similar to when the Suez Canal was being built. You know the Suez Canal? Or like working on oil rigs. And he actually wondered to himself, I'm going slightly off script here, he wondered to himself one day, what happened to all the Westerns? And then he realised they hadn't just stopped. He was under the impression that Westerns as a genre just suddenly stopped, and then he realised they hadn't stopped. They moved into space. All the space films are basically what Westerns were. Sean Connery's character, Federal District Marshal William T. O'Neill, is a policeman, which highlights how environments like the Suez Canal work, the building and the working on oil rigs and that kind of thing. Those environments are often close to lawless, and the police have a raw time trying to keep things stable. Now, and also the American Wild West as well. Peter Hyams has quite consciously stopped himself from getting distracted by special effects, what he calls toys. And I think it shows very well in this film. It is a sci-fi film without a lot of dependence on special effects. John Mollo, the costume designer, was an expert in military costumes, having written a book called Military Fashion, covering European and American uniforms from 1640 to 1914. The scenes of the actual mine are images projected onto a huge screen using introvision, which is a kind of more advanced front projection technique for in-camera compositing, foreground, midground and background all at once, all on one piece of film basically, which is great because that way the wait time is minimised, as the result of the effect is able to be previewed as soon as the rushes from the camera are developed. Otherwise you'd have to be waiting for lots of film rushes and then compositing, and that would take a very long time. The 35mm prints are Dolby stereo audio, but the 70mm anamorphic prints are 6-track Dolby audio, which is something that really interests me. They're optionally encoded for Warner Brothers Megasound. Now, what is Megasound? Well, it had to be specially fitted to cinemas which used it, but only about 4 films used Megasound. The technology made a big thing about infrasonic rumble rendition using subharmonic synthesis. I'd like to look at that. I know kind of how they've done this. It's kind of Aphex and BBE. Anyway, subharmonic synthesis, and probably not quite reaching the famous brown note capability. A graphic novel adaptation of Outland was published in Heavy Metal magazine in 1981, although not in English. Initially, the film was going to be called I.O., but people kept reading it as 10, and or just low, so it got changed. Outland, 1981. Thank you very much. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone.